Hi guys, Michael Ingledew from TDW, and I've changed location, and that's because I wanted to talk about a slightly different subject. It's warmed up a little bit here now, but I've been wandering around with my bobble hat on all morning, so my hair might be a little bit of a mess, but I'm sure you can live with that. Now, I've changed location because actually later on in the week I'm going to talk about these steelworks, and as I mentioned on a previous tutorial, I'm here in my hometown of Dortmund, and it was actually up until about 15-20 years ago a real industrial town, and it's changed and it's had to reinvent itself, and I'm going to talk about that in a tutorial I've got planned for later on in the week when we move to another part of the town. So the old steelworks here behind me is just to give you something pretty to look at, because what I want to talk about in this tutorial is translation and translation of S1000D data. That's purely because when I was in Seville, and I know a few of you are getting a little bit fed up of me mentioning Seville, but you know, there was a lot discussed in Seville, and a lot of information came out of the conference there, and a lot of great debate and discussion. So when I gave my presentation on overcoming the barriers to S1000D Success, one of the things I had as a bullet on one of my slides was the translation issue and translating of S1000D data modules. But there is no real process or no real guidance within S1000D for translating of data modules. Well, let's talk a little bit about why you would want to do that, because the confusion came for these guys because they were mainly in the aviation sector. And if you're in the aviation sector, it's generally accepted that English is the language of communication. Here in Germany, if you go to any aerospace company, they are all speaking English as their day-to-day language. That's how they communicate even here in Germany. That's because there's lots of Brits that works here, there's lots of French and Spanish that work here, and you know, English is kind of the business language, if you like. But if you are producing manuals for an aircraft, in general you're delivering that information in English as you produce it. But that's because the platforms that you're selling and supporting are going all around the world and going to non-native English speakers. That's why we use things like simplified technical English, and that's why we kind of stick to clear language in the production of our technical manuals, in theory. But if you are using S1000D, and let's take some real examples, radar systems in Spain, or here there might be some projects that are specific to the Bundeswehr, you would not want to write and produce that information within the English language. You might actually use the German language as the source language, which is where that language variant or that language code comes in within S1000D. But beyond that, what if we decided, and I'm using a real example here of a project that I'm familiar with, what happens if we created a defense system that was originally built for a German customer? So everything we did was in German, S1000D German, and we decided now that we have sold it to Saudi Arabia, or we may have sold it to India. We might need to translate that into other languages. In fact, I can tell you on the project, it was needed to be translated into other languages. Now, as I said, S1000D has no real guidance on this, and that's by design, because S1000D was originally designed to be a specification that used simplified technical English and just general English on a common project. But over time, it's grown in popularity, and it's used on more and more multinational projects, or just national projects. Here in Germany, S1000D is pretty much a de facto standard for producing technical information. So as I said, S1000D doesn't really give any guidance on the translation problem, if you like. And that's because translation is actually an external process. The weakness within S1000D is that CSDBs struggle to handle translation, because there are real business problems. When you start translating data modules, how do you then maintain the synchronization between data modules? How do you flag data modules have changed? Which one becomes the master? And so on. And this is one of those topics that we have wrestled with as a tech data kind of organization for a very long time, because S1000D CSDBs don't really have a concept for translation. So here in Germany, I know that they've had to develop extensions or add-ons to CSDBs, or have had to create their own specific S1000D workflow to handle translations, and they work in the main pretty well. So the problem is that a lot of us that work in English all day long, have worked in English forever, deliver everything in English, we forget that there is a whole need out there. There's a requirement for non-native English-speaking projects that are not producing English as the source, that they may eventually end up having to translate that information. So from a vendor's perspective, it's often forgotten, because we believe that S1000D doesn't really need to worry about translation. But you do need to worry about translation on lots of projects. And translation is an ongoing problem. Now, if you look at some software vendors, they have CSDBs, and in their organization they also have translation capability. It would make sense for them to synchronize that capability and provide a solution to the problem that's out there today. So translation is an issue for those of us that are working outside of aviation, working outside of normal English production languages. So I hope you found that useful. Translation is out there, and it is a real problem. I hope you like the black backdrop. We're just having an aircraft go over right now. There's a new airport not so far away from here, and the steelworks, or the remnants of the steelworks, this is actually now a museum, believe it or not. You can go and have a little tour around this, and I'm going to talk about this in a tutorial that I'm going to do over the next couple of days, and why I'm here, and why this actually is quite important to me individually, this particular piece of steelworks, piece of history and heritage that's here within Dortmund. Anyway, I'm Michael Ingledew. Translation is a problem, and translation is something that a lot of projects need to concern themselves with, and speak to you soon.